He's receiving the Individual Freedom Award for his hard work and success in governing New York City, in rescuing and rebuilding a city and a people after September 11th, 2001. So it's my pleasure to introduce the 2007 winner of the Individual Freedom Award, a wonderful mayor of New York City, Rudy Giuliani. Thank you for coming.
Thanks a lot, Pete. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Governor. Thanks. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Governor. Thank you. Thank you very, very much, Governor and Congressman Castle, Elise, Mr. Chairman, all the distinguished guests that are here, Mayor Baker, my good friend Louis Free, who's been a friend for many, many years, who's I think we lost Louis to Delaware, didn't we, Louis? Yeah, right. First of all, Congressman, I know it's tough in Washington right now with all the Democrats, but there are more Republicans in this room than all of Manhattan. You think it's easy to be a Republican in New York, right? I used to say that I was the first Republican mayor elected in 25 years, and I was the first one to remain a Republican in 50. And so it's nice to come here and see more Republicans than Manhattan on just this side of the room. It's very, very nice. I have to tell you a story that kind of impressed this on me from the time I first started as mayor of New York. About 4 days before I was elected the mayor of New York City, I was campaigning. It was going to be a very, very close election, and I was trying to get every last vote. And I was I think in Brooklyn, and I shook this man's hand. He had a big smile, a big hand, and he held my hand very tight. And I said, please vote for me. And he looked at me and he said, it'll be until hell freezes over before I vote for a Republican mayor of my city. Damn it. I said, thank you. I couldn't think of what else to say. I moved on to the next person and the next person and the next person. I tried to get every, vote I could get. 3 or 4 days later, I was elected the mayor of New York City in a very close election, but I was elected. I went ahead, I got sworn in as the mayor, I had my inauguration. An entire month went by, the month of January of 1994. I woke up on February 1st, 1994. I had the radio on, I had the all news channel on, and the reporter said, just as I was waking up, this is Mayor Giuliani's first month in office, and the mayor has already set a record. I said, wow, this is great. I set a record. He set a record for more snowfall in January than any time in the last 100 years. And there's more snow predicted for today and for the rest of the month of February. Thanks, Mayor. Well, now, I don't know if I should admit this, but I started to have nightmares about this man. Republican mayor, hell freezing over. I mean, it was really getting to me for a while. But I have to tell you this, the last 2 or 3 years that I was the mayor, there was no snow. And this year there's a Republican mayor, and there's no snow. This could really be what global warming is all about. We're going to have to talk to Al Gore and see if we can adjust his, we're going to have to maybe adjust his thinking about this. But I thank you very, very much for having me. And I'm very, very honored to receive this award. The governor is a person who really led this state during a real transition in government, when we started to think about government differently and in a way to release people's energies and to allow people to flourish and to turn more and more discretion over to people. And it kind of released the entire energy of this state. And you can see it now. And Mayor, you're doing a great job in this city, because I look at a city now as the mayor, former mayor, I look at a city differently. And I see a really beautiful city here in Wilmington. The only thing is that if it's going to snow tonight, I start to get a little nervous. So, but I'm very, very honored to receive this award. This is for a man who really took a government and moved it in a very, very positive direction, and you can still feel the results of it now. Actions like cutting taxes and cutting the size of government and making it more efficient and making it more effective, and increasing opportunity through education. I mean, these are the things that Republicans stand for. I mean, I really believe that we're the party that believes in people a little bit more. I mean, I think and when we get a choice, we kind of think of turning more power over to people, turning more power over to the private sector. And I think in that way, we're the party of individual freedom. And when we do things correctly, that's what we're doing. We're kind of moving more choice to people. I learned that from Ronald Reagan. I worked for President Reagan for the first couple of years of his administration. And Ronald Reagan understood the power of optimistic leadership. And to be a leader, I believe you have to be an optimist. I know Pete's an optimist, has been all his life. I think to be a leader, you should be an optimist. In fact, I think you should be an optimist anyway. You have a lot more fun. Who wants to go to dinner with a pessimist, right? But if you want to be a leader, you have to be an optimist. I mean, suppose I had started my speech like this at the very beginning when I stood up. Things are bad. Things are very bad, and they're only going to get worse. And there's no hope. None. Follow me. This. I'm a little nervous when I do that, but it's only in Manhattan that when I do that, follow me thing, usually 10, 12 people in the audience get up and they start usually on the left side of the audience, but I don't want to say anything, but the reality is that even in Manhattan and certainly in Delaware and the rest of the country, people follow hopes and they follow dreams and they follow the solutions to problems. They follow someone who's a problem solver. And if we want to lead this country, Congress, presidency, the things that make up leadership in this country, as a party, we have to be a party of optimism. We have to be a party that looks toward the future and thinks about how do you solve problems, not just how do you restate them and how do you repeat them. And I saw that happen. I saw that happen in New York City. I saw how if you look at things optimistically and you kind of dream and you have visions, you can move a city in the right direction. Now, since I've left City Hall, I've traveled, I think I counted this right, to 46 states, and I've gone there on behalf of 170 Republican candidates. So I have a pretty good feel for what people are thinking in this country, particularly right now in this last election. And at first glance, if you take just a superficial look at the country, you see a country in which people, in which citizens think that we're not going to get any better. They think the country's headed in the wrong direction. You see those polls, right? Those kind of very pessimistic polls. Or they maybe see a country in which they think that government isn't working and can't work. They look at Hurricane Katrina, some other things, and they say, gee, can government work? Or maybe if you look superficially, you see a country that has doubts about what's going to happen in Iraq and what's going to happen in the war on terror. And some of these things seem very, very difficult, and they seem very, very hard to move. Kind of confronted that somewhat in New York, when people used to see New York City as ungovernable, unmanageable. 2 books were written with those titles. And when I came into office, they took a poll in New York City. And I think CNN took the poll. 59% of the people in New York City wanted to move out and go somewhere else. This is a great way to come into office. You know, you get elected, 2 weeks later they do a poll, and 59% of the people want to move out. That's really, so you start off on a really positive note. So I kind of have been trained to look at things differently. So when I look at the country, even now, even with some of these polls and some of the things, I kind of have a perspective that's a little bit different. Some of it comes from being mayor of New York, and maybe some of it comes from living through September 11 and watching what happened and how people reacted to it. But I see a country where I am absolutely convinced that our future is going to be better than our past. I have no doubt about it. I see a country that's going to grow economically, it's going to grow socially, it's going to grow spiritually. I don't have any doubt about it. I see a country where a government can work. I saw a government that people thought couldn't work, New York City, that we made work. Didn't work perfectly, but it worked a lot better than in the past. And I see a government where, the power of our ideas is enormous. I mean, maybe we got to kind of like take a kind of step back and just look at the ideas that we have and the ideals that we have. We're going to prevail. These are the right ideas. Freedom, rights for people, human rights, participation of women in our society, all the things that our enemies are worried about and oppose and seem to hate us for. Religious freedom. These are the things that we stand for, and these are the right ideas. And I think we have to have a sense of optimism about ourselves, about who we are and where we're going. And that's the way we have to look at our problems. I mean, let's look at immigration for a moment, right? There's been a big debate in Congress for the last year about immigration. Immigration is, if you listen to the news and you listen to the debates, immigration is a big, big problem. Illegal immigration is a big, big problem. Immigration is a big problem. Here's a different perspective. What kind of problem is it when millions and millions and millions of people want to come to your country? Well, what kind of problem is it when you're the country that more people in the world, to this day, with all of our inadequacies and all of our weaknesses and all of our problems, we're the country that people want to come to. They'll knock down walls, they'll build tunnels, they'll do anything they can, put their lives at risk to come to America. To this day, that great shining city on a hill still exists. And that's our problem. Well, there are parts of it that are problems, but imagine if it was the other, right? Suppose nobody wanted to come here. So when we face immigration and we look at it and we figure out how to solve it, instead of kind of having our heads down and thinking that we're dealing with some awful problem, we're dealing with the result of being an enormously successful society. We're dealing with the results, actually, of being the most successful society in the world and the most successful in the history of the world. And there's great strength that comes from that. America's ideas, America's ideals, America's values are still the most positive force for good in the entire world. And there's just no question about that. So when we confront these problems, and they're real and they're big ones, we have to confront them from a spirit of strength, of the accomplishments that we have, and not a spirit of pessimism and a lack of strength. Let's talk for a minute about the war in Iraq, which is of great concern to all of us. Great concern to all of us because we've lost American men, American women, others, allies, friends, the Iraqi people, even our enemies in Iraq. The cost in human life is tremendous. But the reality is that what we're trying to achieve in Iraq is of enormous, profound importance to us. We were attacked in the worst way our country's ever been attacked on September 11, 2001. We were attacked by people who hate us. And when I hear this debate about whether we're at war or not, I think sometimes we're in a cloud. It doesn't matter whether we recognize we're at war or not. They're at war with us. They were at war with us before we recognized they were at war with us. And no matter what happens in Iraq, they're going to continue to be at war with us. So when we focus on Iraq, we have to see it in the context of something much, much bigger, although Iraq is very important and critical, but much, much bigger than just Iraq. And we have to do everything that we can to prevail there. And this is not about President Bush having a victory. It isn't about Harry Reid being right, or Nancy Pelosi, or Teddy Kennedy, or it's not about me being right, or Congressman Castle, or any of us. This is about America. This is about America prevailing, America being able to succeed. If we leave Iraq in failure, then the world is going to be much more dangerous for us. America is going to be in much... I saw this, Mike, when you came to New York. So many different members of Congress came to New York, Republicans, Democrats, liberals, conservatives, didn't matter. I actually thought for a while that we had gotten beyond partisanship on the war on terror. I really did. And I guess maybe even after being mayor of New York City for 7.5 years, you can start to get kind of romantic and think that those things can still happen, you know, like in the old days when Eisenhower and Johnson and Sam Rayburn could say our divisions in politics don't go beyond our shores. We fight over taxes, and we fight over education, and we fight over the environment, and we fight over lots of domestic problems. But where it comes to facing the rest of the world, Republicans and Democrats are together. And we're both going to make compromises to be together. We really need to be able to do that now, because this struggle in Iraq and getting it right is critical to our being able to advance ourselves in defeating terrorism or having a tremendous setback. And it's important because if you think about what is breeding terrorism in the Middle East and some other parts of the world, but particularly in the Middle East, here's what I believe is the root cause of terrorism. And that kind of suggests what the answer is. The root cause of terrorism is that we have decrepit, oppressive governments and regimes in which people are held in bondage in a way in which is almost unthinkable in the modern world. Women can't participate in society. People are stoned and killed for not practicing religion in the way in which the dominant group in that society requires you to practice religion. In Afghanistan, 6 or 7 years ago, if you read the book The Kite Runner, which is a description of the Taliban in charge of Afghanistan, men and women were stoned in the middle of soccer games because a woman might have shown too much of her arm, or they might have been accused of adultery, or they'd be put in a pit and they would be stoned. That's the reason there's so much anger and so much hatred in that part of the world. There's anger and hatred because people are being held in a level of oppression that always produces anger, that always produces hatred. And then, unfortunately and tragically, what they've been able to do is project that anger and hatred to us because they're not accountable, because they practice the art of demagoguery. Instead of the question being asked by the people that are held in that oppression, what are our leaders doing for us? What are the leaders of Syria doing for us? What are the leaders of Iran doing for the people of Iran? People of Iran are unemployed. The people of Iran are poor given the enormous wealth the country has. What are the people of what are the leaders of these countries doing to advance their people? Are they giving them more education? Are they giving them more health care? Are they moving them out of poverty? Are they giving women more rights in society? The answer is no, 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 and no. But instead of those leaders being held accountable, those leaders project the accountability to the United States of America, and they project the accountability to the United Kingdom, and they project the accountability to Israel. And we're not perfect, and we do things wrong, but we're not responsible for the poverty in Iran. And we're not responsible for the oppression in Syria. And there's not much we can do about it. The government of Iran can do something about it, and Assad can do something about it in Syria, but we can't. But he has successfully projected that problem to us. So if we're going to solve this in the long term, in addition to being firm and strong and being on offense against terrorism and using military power, we have to be able to help to create accountable governments in that part of the world that doesn't have accountable governments. We have an opportunity to do that in Iraq. It is not easy to do that. It isn't certain that we're going to be able to do it. It just doesn't happen because you pray for it or you wish it, and it just doesn't happen easily. But if it happens, we're safer. Our children are safer, and we've given terrorism a tremendous defeat. And if it doesn't happen, and they realize that, the terrorists do, maybe better than some of us do, because they are putting tremendous resources into defeating us in Iraq. And they're putting tremendous resources in defeating us in Iraq because they know this will be a tremendous setback for us in the effort against terrorism, in the war on terror. And we have to put the resources in, and we have to unite as a people to root for and to support and to be successful in Iraq. So I support the president. And I believe I would support the president if the president were a Democrat or a Republican or an independent or a whatever else we have, or a Whig or a whatever. The point is I support the president not because I'm a Republican, but because I'm an American and I realize how important it is that we have success there. The effort that he's trying now is not guaranteed to be successful, but we should all pray that it is successful in stabilizing. But we got to move beyond Iraq. We really do. Iraq is part of the war on terror. It's part of the effort against terrorism. It's part of our dealing with terrorism. But terrorism is generated in other parts of the world, both near Iraq and far away. And here's the thing that President Bush did, for which I will always admire him, and for which I believe, when the immediate lack of perspective lifts and we get a chance to look at our whole era, here's what I believe President Bush will be remembered for. I think President Bush got the single most important decision he had to make in his presidency correct. The single most important decision he had to make in his presidency was how he reacted immediately to September 11, 2001. And what he did on September 20th, 2001, in addressing a joint session of Congress, was to put America, for the first time, after 30 years of being on defense against terrorism. What I mean by defense against terrorism, I mean terrorists attacking us, terrorists killing us, terrorists declaring war on us. Sometimes we would react. Sometimes we wouldn't react at all, like when the USS Cole was attacked. And when we reacted, we would react with a law enforcement, usually, approach. Bin Laden announced that he was at war against us. We didn't hear it. We didn't pick it up. I don't really blame anybody before September 11, 2001. Because I think maybe, given the press of all the other things that were going on in the world, first the Cold War, then the things that were going on in Eastern Europe, and maybe it's understandable. It would have been better if we had seen it, but maybe it's understandable that we didn't. But I do blame people after September 11, 2001. President Bush put us on offense against terrorists. He announced on September 20th, 2001, we will no longer be on defense. We will no longer just wait for them to come and attack us, we will go on defense against them. We will go on offense against them rather than being on defense. And he's kept us that way. And we're going to have to keep on offense against terrorism, no matter what happens in Iraq. I hope and pray we're successful in Iraq. But I'm no more of a prophet than you are, and I know these things are very difficult. No matter what happens in Iraq, we have to remain on offense against terrorism. And I look at the reaction of the so-called potential Republican candidates for president, and I look at the reaction of the potential Democratic candidates for president, and I believe that the Republican candidates for president, some of whom have big differences about other things, I think understand this a lot better than the Democrats, that we have to be on offense against terrorism. And we need your support. We need you to keep the party strong. We need you to continue to raise money for the party. We need you to be optimists and think about the fact of how much we have to contribute. When I was mayor of New York City, first year that I was the mayor, I cut a small tax, a $36 million tax, a hotel occupancy tax. And my deputy mayor and one of my oldest friends, Peter Powers, walked into my office and he said to me, "You just set another record." I said, "What record did I set?" He said, "This is the biggest tax cut in the history of New York City." I said, "It can't be. We're a $40–50 billion budget. And I did a little measly $36 million tax cut. How could I have set a record?" He said it was the first time in the history of the city anybody cut a tax. And then we cut taxes 23 more times. We cut taxes over $8 billion. And I saw it work. I don't just believe in supply-side economics. I understand it. I've practiced it because I collected a lot more money from the lower taxes than I was collecting from the higher taxes. And that's exactly what's happening right now. The United States government is collecting more money from the tax cuts that the president and the Republicans brought about in Congress than it was collecting from the higher taxes that existed just a few years ago. And we have to continue to understand that about our economy. Republicans understand that. Democrats don't. It's a difference between us. It's an honest difference. It's a difference I respect, but it's a difference between us. And it's a bigger difference than just about economics. It's about philosophy, too. And here's the difference. They trust government more. We trust people more. I'll give you one other example of that. And it's one that is very, very important to me. And that is education. When I look at the future of America, I told you I'm an optimist. I believe we'll prevail in the war on terror because we have the ideas and the ideals, and we have more strength than we even think we have because of that. The only thing that worries me, the only thing that I'm concerned about with the globalization of our economy, which I think is a wonderful thing for us, the only thing that concerns me is our educational system, particularly K through 12, because we are getting the world that we wished for 20 and 30 years ago. We're getting the world of free trade. We're getting the world of a China that wants to compete with us rather than go to war with us. Who would have ever thought that when Nixon did the opening to China? That what we'd have is a China that wants to aggressively compete with the United States, but not necessarily go to war with us. And that's true throughout a lot of the rest of the world. But now all of a sudden we have the world that we were hoping for, the world we may have even been praying for, and now we're kind of worried about competing. And I believe we're worried about competing because we're worried about how well educated our children are. Because that's the thing they're going to need. They're going to need to know math and science. They're going to need to speak a second language. They're going to need it more 10 and 20 years from now than they need it today. And I think we know that not everywhere and not in every situation, but across the wide spectrum of this country, K through 12, our educational system is not as good as it has to be or it should be. Children in China and India go to school for much longer periods of time than children in America. They're more advanced in science and math. They're more advanced in languages. And we have got to not just at the margins change American education. We have to revolutionize it. We have to reform it. And as the mayor of New York, I changed my mind about how to approach education. I changed my mind from experience. I began thinking that we could reform the public educational system from the top. That we could impose higher standards, more criteria, measurements, goals. And there's one thing that happened that kind of changed my mind. Somewhere in the mid-90s, a group of people got together and they raised money and offered 2,500 scholarships for public school students in New York City. 2,500 scholarships so that the children could go to parochial or private schools. Do you know how many applications we had for the 2,500 scholarships? How many applications they received? 167,000. 167,000 children, parents saying, I want a better education for my child. You're not giving my child a good enough education. And I can't afford it. You can afford it, but I can't. And I believe that the way in which we can reform public education in this country is if we could give scholarships to those 167,000 and let those parents, not a federal education bureaucracy, not a state education bureaucracy, not a local education bureaucracy, let the parents evaluate the schools and pick the good ones and vote the bad ones with their voucher out of existence. There's just one other issue that I want to talk to you about, and that's something that has moved from an economic issue to a national security issue in our lifetime, and that's energy. Energy independence, energy diversification has been a critical issue for America for 30 years. And maybe it's always been a national security issue, but now it is. Now it is because we haven't done the things we should have done in the last 20 or 30 years. America is dependent on parts of the world that are dangerous and that want to extort, not just from us, but from our allies and others, things that are very dangerous to us. And we've got to set a goal and a vision of energy independence if we want to be safe, and not just economically secure, but safe. And what we've done over the last 30 years is we've kind of fought this with both hands tied behind our backs. There hasn't been a new refinery built in this country since the mid to late 1970s. There hasn't been a new nuclear power plant built in this country since the mid-1970s. We have been on hold for 30 years. There are promising developments: ethanol, clean coal, other forms and alternatives for reducing our reliance on oil. All of them not really supported with urgency, with the kind of urgency with which we put a man on the moon or built an atomic bomb. And in many ways, right now, this is just as important to us. We've got to crack through this, and we need leadership to do that. Because each one of these things is stopped because there is a small, narrow, special interest that stops it. The good of the country, however, requires that it goes forward. And that's what leadership is all about. Leadership is being able to overcome some of the narrow little silos in which special interest stops progress and being able to move forward. And we're going to have to do it with energy independence. China is planning on growing. China is planning on growing, and China is doing at least two things about energy. China is conserving, and we should do that a lot more than we have and do it really seriously. But China also realizes that it can't conserve its way to 3 or 4 or 500 million people moving out of poverty and moving into the middle class. If it conserves, those people aren't going to have air conditioning, and those people aren't going to have heat, and those people aren't going to have electricity, and those people aren't going to have an office building to work in or a factory to work in. So what else is China doing? China is building 30 or 40 nuclear power plants. And China is going around the world trying to figure out how to buy oil, how to develop hybrid cars. Maybe we got to copy China. Maybe what we have to do is copy China, just like, remember way back when the Soviet Union put the first man in space? That's like a real embarrassment to us. And we decided from President Eisenhower to President Kennedy that we were just going to use every resource of this country. We were going to catch up with the Soviet Union, and we were going to beat them. And we did. And we've got to do that with energy. We need to be a country that is energy diversified and that is energy independent. And that has to be one of the great challenges for the next President of the United States. So I'm exploring whether to run. So people ask me, what do you do? What do you do when you explore? Well, you come to Delaware. And you talk to people. And you talk to people and you listen to people, and then you finally have to answer a question. You got to answer some practical questions. You know, can you raise the money? And can you put the organization together? And do you have a chance to get nominated and a chance to win? You never know for sure. No one ever knows for sure whether you're going to win or lose. But I think the big question you have to ask is, can you really lead the country? And can you, maybe you can put it into one overarching question. Can you lead the country so that we make it better than it is? And that's why you do it. That's why I ran for mayor of New York City. I ran for mayor of New York City because I believed that I could make New York City better than it was, that I could hand it over to the next mayor, in my case, Mayor Bloomberg, or to the next generation, a better city, a safer city, a stronger city, a spiritually stronger place. And if you want to run for President of the United States, because it is so difficult and it is so hard and it's so much more important than just you are, you've got to believe that you can do that. And if I believe that I can do it, then I will. And if I don't, I'll support somebody else. But in the meantime, I'm going to spend a lot of time talking to people and listening to them. I've been, as I said, in 40-plus states. We'll figure out a way to get to the rest. And a lot of this is listening to people and trying to figure out what they need and what they want, and then figuring out whether you're the one that can make a unique contribution to solving it. But I have to tell you that in doing all of this, I come away with a tremendous sense of confidence with the American people. I think this country is much stronger than it believes it is. It's much stronger economically, it's much stronger politically, it's much stronger socially, and we've got absolutely the strength to solve every one of our problems. There was a time on September 11, after the attack took place, after we were trapped in a building, and after I was walking on the street and I saw so many people injured and hurt and filled with soot. There was a time when I said to myself that day, more than once, can we get through this? And I had just read Tom Brokaw's book about the greatest generation, about your fathers and grandfathers and great-grandfathers who got us through the Second World War. Totally remarkable people. Challenged in a way that maybe Americans before them had never been challenged. And when I was reading that book that summer before September 11, I wondered to myself, I wonder if we're strong enough. I wonder if we're strong enough to deal with this. We didn't grow up with a depression like they did that made them really strong. We've had things pretty easy. I wonder if we have the strength to do it. And then I saw what the firefighters did and the police officers did going into the building, not running away, standing their ground. I saw all these construction workers come and volunteer, these guys with muscles. They look like the Philadelphia Eagle football team. I was here for that game, Pete, and I left crying. I hope you don't have a picture of that, because it's embarrassing to see a grown man cry. But I saw these construction workers volunteer, and it started to lift my spirits. I started to believe that we could do this. But then there was one photograph that did it. One photograph that convinced me. I've never turned back. I've never looked back. And I've never had the slightest doubt that we have the strength to do this, because we are their children. And we do have the same love of liberty and freedom and understanding of it that they taught us. The picture was the firefighters putting the flag up at ground zero, looking exactly, to me, like the Marines at Iwo Jima putting the flag up. And I knew what they were standing on top of. They were standing on top of a cauldron. They were standing on top of fires of 2,000 degrees or more that rage for 100 days. And they put their lives at risk to put that flag up. And they put that flag up and said, you can't beat us, you can't defeat us, because we're Americans. And we don't say this with arrogance or in a militaristic way or in an angry way, just in a spiritual way. Our ideas are better than yours. Our ideas are necessary for you because they'll make you better. They'll make you successful. They'll make you ultimately have individual freedom, which is what this award is all about. And I really, really treasure it, because I think it's the single most important thing that America can contribute to the world. It has to always be our goal when it is we're a great country. Thank you, and God bless you.